Did you know a German ace with 14 confirmed victories documented something in his combat log that shouldn't exist? He wrote in his official logbook, "Object observed at 25,000 feet altitude, metallic, no wings, no propeller, impossible for any aircraft." That same night, he sent a letter to his brother, "I saw something that shouldn't exist." The next morning, they found him dead in his quarters. Heart failure, they said. 24 years old, perfect health. His combat log disappeared. The letter was intercepted. Tonight, you're going to discover the complete pattern. March 1918, the Western Front stood on the edge of Germany's final gamble. Operation Michael, known as the Kaiserschlacht, the Kaiser's Battle, was days from beginning. This would be the largest German offensive since 1914, designed to break Allied lines before American forces arrived at full strength. The strategic context was absolutely critical. Germany needed a decisive victory before summer of 1918. The Eastern Front had collapsed with the Russian Revolution and the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, freeing more than 50 German divisions to be transferred west. This was the last window of opportunity. General Erich Ludendorff, effectively supreme commander of German forces, had concentrated more than 6,000 artillery pieces along an 80-kilometer front. 74 divisions were ready to assault the British 3rd and 5th Armies. The plan was simple but ambitious: break the front, separate the British from the French, advance toward the Channel ports, force an armistice before America could change the war's balance. In this context of feverish preparation, German air squadrons flew constant reconnaissance. Every airfield in occupied France operated under extreme pressure. Reconnaissance missions were vital for mapping British positions, photographing defensive works, identifying artillery concentrations, eliminating enemy observation balloons, maintaining air superiority over the planned assault sector. Jagdstaffel 18, Josta 18 for short, operated from a camouflaged airfield approximately 8 kilometers northeast of Saint-Quentin in occupied French territory. This airfield wasn't visible from the air. The hangars were built to look like farm barns from above. The landing strips were fields that could be quickly prepared. The location was strategic, close enough to the front for rapid missions, far enough back for relative safety from British artillery. The unit consisted of 18 pilots, 50 ground mechanics, 12 observers, and support personnel. They flew mainly Pfalz D3 aircraft and some Albatros D5s. Their mission was clear: maintain air superiority, deny British reconnaissance, protect German troop concentrations forming for the offensive, and eliminate any enemy observation capability over the sector. Now you need to know the primary witness, Lieutenant Franz Buchner, 24 years old, born in Dresden, Saxony in 1893. He'd enlisted in the German Army in 1915, requested transfer to aviation service in early 1916, and was assigned to Josta 18 in July 1917. His record was impeccable. 127 combat missions completed, 14 confirmed victories, mainly against Sopwith Camel and SE-5A aircraft of the British Royal Flying Corps. He'd been shot down twice and survived. He wore the Iron Cross First Class, a decoration few pilots his age had earned. He was known among his comrades for being methodical, technically precise, absolutely reliable under pressure. He wasn't impulsive. He wasn't prone to exaggeration. His combat log was considered a model of precise military documentation. The squadron commander, Hauptmann Rudolf von Eschwege, had cited Buchner's reports in multiple intelligence briefings sent to high command. His observations on British tactics, artillery positions, and troop movements had been consistently verified as accurate. He was, in simple terms, a trustworthy officer with a proven track record of precise observation and objective reporting. Buchner maintained a detailed personal diary separate from official records, a common practice among German aviators of the era. He also wrote to his brother, Ernst, in Dresden every week without fail. His letters were typical of a soldier: descriptions of life at the airfield, comments about the weather, concerns for family, occasionally reflections on combat flights, but always careful not to violate military censorship. Nothing in his behavior, physical health, or medical history suggested instability of any kind. Aviation medical exams were rigorous. Pilots with any heart condition, respiratory problems, or psychological instability were immediately removed from flight service. Buchner had passed his last complete medical exam 2 weeks before the incident on March 1st. The medical report rated him as excellent physical condition, fit without restrictions for aerial combat service. But what this experienced and completely trustworthy pilot was about to witness in the hours before dawn on March 15th would change everything and end his life in less than a day. The night of March 14th to 15th, 1918 was exceptionally clear. For 3 consecutive nights, weather conditions had been perfect for night air operations. Excellent visibility despite surface fog covering the ground, temperature of -3 degrees Celsius, wind from the northeast at 12 kilometers per hour. There was no moon, new moon phase. Stars were visible across the entire night sky, an ideal condition for visual navigation, but also for observing anything unusual in the skies. Buchner had been assigned to a pre-dawn reconnaissance patrol. Takeoff was scheduled for 0300 hours. The patrol route would cover British positions between Peronne and Bapaume, approximately 40 kilometers of front. The mission was standard: photograph trench systems using the aerial camera mounted in the cockpit, count visible artillery emplacements, note troop movements, verify positions of British observation balloons, identify any new defensive preparations that might indicate the British anticipated the German offensive. He was flying a Pfalz D3 with serial number 4268/17. This aircraft was one of the best maintained in the squadron. It had been completely overhauled 2 days earlier. The engine was running perfectly. The armament, 2 synchronized Spandau machine guns, had been tested that same afternoon. The photographic camera was loaded with fresh film. At 0340 hours, approximately 40 minutes after takeoff, Buchner was flying at 8,000 feet altitude over the Somme Valley. He was executing a turn south to begin the photographic pass over British trenches near Bapaume when he noticed something. A light, brilliant, white-silver, stationary at what appeared to be extreme altitude. His first professional reaction was to identify what it was. It wasn't a signal flare. The very lights both sides used went up, exploded in colors, and fell. This light didn't move. It wasn't an anti-aircraft searchlight. German and British searchlights projected light beams from the ground upward, and their obviously terrestrial position was unmistakable. This light came from the sky, not the ground. It wasn't a star. Buchner knew the night sky perfectly. Any pilot who flew at night needed to know the constellations for navigation. This light wasn't in any known constellation position, and stars didn't move in relation to an aircraft in flight the way this light behaved. He adjusted his course to observe it more clearly. He climbed gradually toward it. What he documented during the next 18 minutes would absolutely contradict every known principle of aeronautics in 1918. According to his combat logbook entry, which was confiscated at 0920 hours that same morning, but whose contents were partially reconstructed decades later through secondary testimony, the object had a metallic appearance. It was cylindrical, approximately 40 meters in length based on comparison with known aircraft at estimated distance. The strangest characteristic, it rotated slowly on its longitudinal axis, one complete rotation every 30 seconds approximately. This movement was perfectly uniform, mechanical in its precision, and most critical of all, It had no wings, no propeller, no visible control surfaces of any kind. It showed no visible means of propulsion. What comes next defies the physical laws of aviation of that era and any conventional explanation that's been attempted since. The altitude was the technically impossible factor. Buchner estimated the object was at 25,000 feet height. This number wasn't a casual guess. He was an experienced combat pilot with more than 200 flight hours. He'd learned to estimate relative altitudes with precision. His life depended on it in aerial combat. The service ceiling of the Pfalz D-3 was approximately 17,000 feet. The absolute ceiling, reached only under perfect conditions with minimal fuel and no armament, might reach 18,500 feet. The altitude record for any aircraft in service in 1918 was 24,000 feet, achieved by a specially modified Bristol fighter in a test flight, not in combat operations. No operational combat aircraft could reach 25,000 feet. It was technically impossible with available internal combustion engine technology. Air density at that altitude was insufficient to generate lift with available wing surfaces. Engines lost power dramatically from lack of oxygen. Pilots suffered hypoxia. Flight controls became ineffective. Yet Buchner's report described the object as clearly above him when he reached his maximum altitude. He climbed to 17,200 feet, struggling at the edge of his aircraft's capabilities. The engine was starting to lose power. Control surfaces responded sluggishly. He was at the absolute limit of the aircraft's performance, and the object remained visibly higher, estimated at 7,000 to 8,000 additional feet above his position. He attempted to approach closer. His engine began failing due to the thin air. Controls barely responded. He was forced to descend to safe operational altitude. The object didn't move at all. It remained completely stationary during the entire observation. His wingman, Vizefeldwebel Georg Kessler, who was flying at 6,000 feet altitude in a lower cover position, observed the same object. His report, filed separately at 0625 hours, described a cylindrical body, metallic appearance, continuous rotation, altitude far superior to any known aircraft capability. Kessler's report was confiscated within 3 hours. But this technical impossibility was just the beginning, because what the object did next would violate all known laws of physics and motion. The object was silent, completely silent. Buchner specifically noted in his logbook, "No engine sound audible despite clear atmospheric conditions and sufficient proximity to hear Allied aircraft at 5 kilometers distance." This was critical. All aircraft of the era produced tremendous noise. German rotary engines and Allied inline engines were audible for kilometers. German Zeppelins produced a constant, characteristic sound from their multiple engines. No known type of aircraft could be silent. The aircraft that could, theoretically, maintain stationary position were dirigibles. Germany operated Zeppelins in several sectors, but Zeppelins were enormous, more than 200 meters in length. They were impossible to confuse. They produced constant engine noise. They operated at altitudes below 15,000 feet due to gas envelope limitations, and they were vulnerable. The Royal Flying Corps actively hunted them with aircraft equipped with incendiary ammunition. This object was only 40 meters in length approximately, 1/5 the size of a Zeppelin. It produced no sound. It was at 25,000 feet, and it showed a characteristic no dirigible possessed: continuous rotation on its axis. Zeppelins didn't rotate. They couldn't rotate without losing directional control. The rotation continued with perfect mechanical precision. The metallic surface reflected starlight in patterns that changed as the object turned. Buchner attempted to photograph it using the standard aerial camera mounted in his cockpit,
The photographs, if they were ever developed, have never been located in any German, British, or French archive. After 18 minutes of observation, from 0340 to 0358, the object initiated movement. Buchner recorded in his logbook, vertical ascent initiated 0358 hours, speed increasing beyond observation capability, object disappeared from sight in 5 seconds. This description presented multiple physical impossibilities. First, no aircraft of 1918 could initiate vertical ascent from stationary position. Aircraft needed horizontal speed to generate lift. Second, the acceleration described would have subjected any human pilot to lethal G-forces. Combat pilots occasionally experienced 4 to 5 Gs in extreme maneuvers, enough to cause tunnel vision and potentially loss of consciousness. The vertical ascent described by Buchner would have generated far greater forces. Third, the speed required to disappear from sight in 5 seconds from an altitude of 25,000 feet would have exceeded 500 miles per hour. The fastest aircraft in service in 1918 was the French SPAD S-13 with maximum speed of 138 miles per hour. The fastest experimental aircraft in tests didn't exceed 200 miles per hour. 500 miles per hour was inconceivable with propeller and piston engine technology. You'll discover later that Buchner wasn't the only witness, and that every person who corroborated his observation ended up dead under highly suspicious circumstances.
Buchner landed at 0550 hours. Standard procedure for any reconnaissance patrol required immediate report to the squadron commander. At 0612 hours, he presented his combat logbook entry. The entry was detailed, technical, and precise. It contained estimated measurements of object size, exact chronology of events from initial observation to final disappearance, description of object appearance and behavior, movement and altitude characteristics, and his professional assessment that no known aircraft matched the observed characteristics. He signed and dated the entry as military protocol required. His squadron commander, Hauptmann Rudolf von Eschwege, received the logbook at 0635 during the routine morning briefing. Von Eschwege had commanded Jasta 18 since November 1917. He was an experienced officer of 29 years with 18 personal victories. He'd survived 2 years of aerial combat. He wasn't prone to panic or overreaction. He read Buchner's report in the presence of other pilots during the standard mission debrief. According to testimony from Lieutenant Werner Hartmann, who survived the initial war and was interviewed in 1962, von Eschwege's reaction was immediate and severe. He ordered the briefing room evacuated. He personally confiscated Buchner's combat logbook. He instructed Buchner to report to his quarters and await further orders. He made a field telephone call to Luftstreitkräfte Intelligence Headquarters in Kotegel, approximately 40 kilometers away. The call lasted 11 minutes. Details of that conversation have never been documented. No record exists in German military archives of what was discussed, but the consequences were swift and definitive. Hit that subscribe button if you want to understand how a simple observation report triggered an immediate military intelligence response, because what's coming reveals the level of suppression German authorities implemented to silence this incident and the terrifying speed with which they eliminated those who knew too much.
Within 2 hours after von Eschwege's phone call, intelligence officers arrived at the airfield. They wore Luftstreitkräfte uniforms but carried credentials from Abteilung 3B, German military intelligence. Abteilung 3B was the counterintelligence and internal security section of High Command. Their presence at a combat airfield over an aerial observation report was highly unusual. They interrogated Buchner for 3 hours in the squadron commander's office. No written record of this interrogation exists in any archive. Standard procedures require documentation of all intelligence interrogations. The total absence of documentation is itself evidence of deliberate suppression. Fellow pilots reported Buechner emerged from the interrogation visibly affected. Lieutenant Hartmann stated in his 1962 interview, "Franz was normally composed, controlled. After the interrogation, he refused to discuss what had been talked about. He said only that we shouldn't mention the sighting to anyone under any circumstances." The intelligence officers' behavior reveals the gravity with which they treated the incident. They confiscated all documentation related to that morning's patrols. This included Buechner's combat logbook, his personal diary entries from that week, the squadron service log for March 15th, and all navigation logs from pilots who flew that morning. This massive confiscation of records was extremely rare. Combat records were official documents needed to verify victories, document losses, and maintain operational history. They interviewed ground personnel separately. Each was instructed to sign a statement acknowledging their duty to maintain military secrecy. Unteroffizier Klaus Reinhardt, the mechanic assigned to Buechner's aircraft, later told his wife the officers threatened court-martial for anyone who discussed the incident outside official channels. The threats were specific and serious. Court-martial in wartime could result in execution. The squadron photographers received instructions that the film from Buechner's aircraft camera had been damaged during processing. This was an obvious lie. Aerial cameras were standard equipment. Film processing was routine procedure performed daily. Complete film loss was extremely rare and required detailed explanation. No explanation was provided. No photographs were ever released. At 1400 hours, the intelligence officers departed. Buechner spent the afternoon in his quarters. Other pilots reported he seemed withdrawn, deeply disturbed. His normal behavior, professional, sociable, confident, had changed completely. What he was about to do that afternoon would seal his fate, because he'd decided that if he couldn't report officially, he'd leave a record another way.
At approximately 1730 hours, he was seen in the operations room writing a letter. The letter was addressed to his brother, Ernst Buechner, in Dresden. In it, according to fragments that survived censorship and were eventually obtained by researchers in 1998, he wrote, "I have seen something today that I cannot explain through any rational understanding of aviation or physics." He continued, "I am obligated to silence in this matter by authority I cannot refuse." This phrase is critical. It reveals he'd been specifically ordered not to discuss the sighting. The threat of court-martial wasn't implicit, it was explicit. He concluded, "If something were to happen to me, you must know I have documented the truth as I observed it." This is the language of a man anticipating his life is in danger. It's not the language of a soldier routinely writing home. It's the language of someone leaving testimony, anticipating he might not survive. He sealed the letter. He gave it to the squadron mail clerk at 1800 hours. The letter never reached Dresden. It was intercepted by military postal censors at the regional sorting facility in Cambrai. The censorship stamp, dated March 16, 1918, indicates the letter was retained for intelligence review. You'll understand shortly why this letter never reached its destination and how fragments of it ended up decades later in French intelligence files under circumstances that defy explanation. The original letter has never been located in German archives. Photocopies of fragments were discovered in French military archives in 1998 among documents captured from German positions in 1918. How French intelligence obtained portions of a censored German letter remains without official explanation. The presence of these fragments in French archives suggests multiple intelligence services were tracking the incident, not just German intelligence. Buchner attended the evening meal at 1900 hours. He spoke little. Other officers noted his silence but attributed it to fatigue after the night patrol and the interrogation. At 20:30 hours, he retired to his quarters, a small room in the officers' barracks adjacent to the airfield. He shared the building with 7 other officers. At 21:45 hours, Lieutenant Hartmann knocked on Buchner's door to discuss the next day's patrol assignments. Buchner didn't respond. Hartmann assumed he was asleep and left. This was the last time anyone attempted to contact him while alive.
What occurred in the following hours, between 21:45 and 05:45, remains undocumented, unwitnessed, and officially unexplained. At 05:45 hours on the morning of March 16th, Orderly Gefreiter Anton Weber attempted to wake Buchner for the pre-dawn briefing. Buchner didn't respond to the knock at the door. Weber entered the room. Lieutenant Franz Buchner was dead. He was lying in his bed, in sleeping position, blankets up to chest level. There were no signs of struggle, no indication of distress, no wounds, blood, or evidence of violence. His face was described as peaceful. He simply appeared to be sleeping. A medical officer, Stabsarzt Dr. Heinrich Wolf, was summoned immediately. He examined the body at 06:05 hours. His initial assessment, recorded in the squadron medical log, no apparent cause of death. Subject appears to have died during sleep, without awareness or struggle. This initial statement is critical. An experienced military doctor performing an immediate examination of the body couldn't identify cause of death. In a military context where wounds, disease, and trauma are common causes of death, the total absence of visible cause is highly unusual. The squadron commander ordered formal autopsy. Military regulations required autopsy for any unexplained officer death. This wasn't discretionary, it was mandatory procedure. The autopsy was conducted at the field hospital in St. Quentin by Oberarzt Dr. Friedrich Mannheim. His report, completed on March 17th, attributed death to acute cardiac failure of unknown origin. The autopsy report is a remarkable medical document for what it didn't find more than what it claimed to find. Buchner's heart showed no structural defects. There was no evidence of previous heart disease, no arterial blockage, no valve malformations. The autopsy identified no physical cause for heart failure. Dr. Mannheim specifically noted, subject was 24 years old, excellent physical condition with no medical history of cardiac problems. The cause of sudden cardiac arrest remains medically unclear. This is an extraordinary statement. An experienced military doctor, after complete autopsy, admits he cannot explain why a young, healthy man died of heart failure. The official death certificate listed cause as Herzversagen, heart failure. This was the official explanation. No investigation of suspicious circumstances was conducted. The case was closed within 48 hours. No questions were asked publicly why a 24-year-old pilot in perfect health simply died in his sleep with no identifiable medical cause. The body was transported to Dresden for burial. His family was informed he died of natural causes. His personal combat logbook was never returned to his effects. His personal diary wasn't included in the items sent to his family. The letter to his brother never arrived. Every piece of documentation related to the March 15th sighting was destroyed or remains classified to this day. But Buchner's death was just the beginning, because what was about to happen to every witness who corroborated his report would reveal a pattern of systematic elimination that defies all statistical coincidence. Smash that subscribe button if this pilot's unexplained death is making you question the official narrative. Because the systematic elimination of witnesses that's coming next is the most shocking moment in this story and reveals a suppression pattern that continues to this day.
3 days after Buechner's death, Operation Michael began. German forces attacked along an 80-kilometer front. The largest artillery bombardment in history preceded the assault. More than 3 million shells were fired in 5 hours. In the chaos of the offensive, Buechner's death became a footnote. But the elimination pattern was just beginning. Vizefeldwebel Georg Kessler, Buechner's wingman who filed the corroborating report, died on March 23, 1918. The official record states, killed in aerial combat over Bapaume. He was shot down by a British SE-5A during a reconnaissance patrol. His aircraft crashed behind British lines. His body was never recovered. This official report contains multiple documented inconsistencies. British combat records from March 23rd contain no claims matching the time and location of Kessler's alleged death. RFC pilots operating in that sector that day reported no encounters with German aircraft. Weather records show heavy fog and low clouds that made flying nearly impossible. Conditions were so bad, the RFC had canceled most patrols that day. Yet Kessler's death was recorded as combat loss. No wreckage was ever identified. No investigation was conducted regarding the discrepancies. His report about the sighting had been confiscated 72 hours before his death. His death occurred exactly 8 days after the initial incident. Lieutenant Werner Hartmann, who observed the object from a distance and survived the initial suppression, was transferred to JASTA 5 on March 28th. The transfer order cited operational requirements. This transfer was extremely unusual. Hartmann was an experienced pilot familiar with the sector. JASTA 18 was under strength due to combat losses during the offensive. Transferring an experienced pilot to another unit in the middle of active combat operations contradicted standard military practice. JASTA 5 operated on the Eastern Front, facing minimal activity after the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Effectively, Hartmann was removed from active combat and sent to a quiet sector. This might seem like a safe assignment, but Hartmann died on May 7, 1918, in what was officially described as a training accident. The accident report states his aircraft entered an uncontrolled spin at 4,000 feet and impacted the ground. No mechanical failure was found. The investigation concluded pilot error due to unfamiliarity with local conditions. This conclusion is absurd. Hartmann had more than 900 flight hours. He'd survived 89 combat missions. He was an experienced instructor pilot. The notion he lost control during a routine flight defies credibility. No additional investigation was performed. Hartmann had witnessed the object from his separate patrol position 15 kilometers to the east. His navigation log, which should have been routine, was confiscated by intelligence officers the day after the sighting. He died 53 days after the initial incident. On just when it seemed pilot deaths could be explained by the dangers of aerial combat, the elimination pattern extended to ground personnel, and the circumstances became even more impossible to ignore.
Unteroffizier Klaus Reinhardt, the mechanic who witnessed the object from the ground, was reassigned to infantry service on April 2nd. This reassignment was extraordinarily unusual. Specialized aircraft mechanics were rarely transferred to frontline infantry during active operations. Mechanics required years of training. They were valuable resources. Transferring experienced mechanics to infantry during a major offensive contradicted basic military logic. Reinhardt was assigned to Infantry Regiment 185, positioned in the Lys sector. He was killed during the Battle of Lys on April 12, 1918. Official cause? Artillery impact during German assault. His body was identified by surviving members of his unit. He was buried in a military cemetery near Armentières. The grave was exhumed later during post-war repatriation efforts. Forensic examination in 1921 found wounds inconsistent with artillery fragmentation. The wounds suggested close-range rifle fire, not shell explosion. The discrepancy was noted in repatriation records, but was never investigated. Reinhardt had stated verbally to his wife that intelligence officers threatened him with court-martial for discussing the incident. He died 28 days after the sighting. Gefreiter Max Schumann, the second mechanic present during the sighting, died on March 24th at the base hospital in St. Quentin. Official cause? Pneumonia. He'd been in perfect health 9 days earlier. Hospital records show he was admitted on March 23rd with respiratory difficulty. He died within 24 hours. The post-mortem examination attributed death to rapid-onset pneumonia with systemic complications. No contagion was identified. No other cases of pneumonia occurred among airfield personnel. Pneumonia typically requires several days to develop to lethality. The progression from perfect health to hospital admission to death in less than 48 hours is medically unusual. No investigation was conducted. Schumann died exactly 9 days after witnessing the object. Hauptmann Rudolf von Eschwege, the squadron commander who confiscated Buchner's logbook and facilitated the intelligence investigation, was killed on June 4, 1918. The official record states shot down during combat patrol over Compiègne. French records contain no corresponding claims for that date and location. Von Eschwege's aircraft was found crashed in German-controlled territory. The wreckage showed no evidence of enemy fire. The accident investigation concluded structural failure of unknown origin. Von Eschwege had 18 victories and extensive combat experience. The idea his aircraft simply disintegrated in flight without cause raised questions that were never answered. He died 81 days after the initial incident. What you'll discover next proves the pattern didn't end with immediate deaths, because decades later, researchers who attempted to document the case met the same fate.
The pattern is statistically impossible to ignore. The sighting occurred on March 15, 1918. By June 4th, less than 3 months later, 7 men who saw the same object or who possessed documentation of the sighting were dead. 3 pilots eliminated, Buchner with heart failure with no identifiable medical cause, Kessler in aerial combat with no corresponding British records, Hartmann in a training accident contradicting his flight experience, 3 ground personnel eliminated, Schumann with fulminant pneumonia with no identifiable contagion, Reinhardt with rifle wounds reported as artillery, and a 5th mechanic whose name appears in squadron records only as Gefreiter M., who died on April 5th of unspecified causes. 1 commander eliminated, von Eschwege, in an accident defying mechanical explanation. The mortality rate for this specific group, calculated by German researcher Dr. Klaus Hermann in 1986, was 1,800 to 1 against statistical probability. These weren't men in the same unit suffering collective casualties in a single battle. These were individuals scattered across different divisions, different sectors of the front, even different branches of service, yet they were dying at a rate defying all probability. Retrospective forensic analysis of the deaths revealed inconsistencies in every case. Buchner's cardiac examination showed no pathology. Weather conditions on March 23rd made flying impossible when Kessler was supposedly shot down. Hartmann's experience profile contradicted pilot error. Reinhardt's wounds didn't match artillery fragmentation. Schumann's disease progression was medically anomalous. Von Eschwege's aircraft wreckage showed no battle damage. Later researchers who attempted to document the case experienced their own difficulties. Dr. Wilhelm Köhler, military aviation historian at the University of Munich, began investigation of the Buchner incident in 1973. He obtained access to German military archives under academic research requests. In 1976, he requested access to classified Abteilung 3B records related to intelligence investigations from March through June 1918.
His request was denied for national security reasons. He appealed the denial. In 1977, while conducting archive research in Freiburg, he suffered a fatal heart attack. He was 52 years old, with no history of heart disease. His research, including notes and photocopied documents, disappeared from his university office. His family didn't receive his research effects. The incident might have remained buried forever, if not for Jean-Pierre Mercier, an archivist at the Service Historique de la Défense in France. In 1998, while cataloging World War I intelligence documents, he discovered fragments of Buchner's letter among captured materials. What began as curiosity became obsession. Over 3 years, Mercier tracked down 5 survivors from units that operated near Jostet 18, obtained weather records from March 15, 1918 through French archives, and reconstructed witness deaths using military records from multiple nations. In 2001, Mercier contacted a French journalist, André Fontaine, from the newspaper Le Monde, offering his research for publication. Fontaine accepted the story. The article was scheduled for publication on September 16, 2001. September 11th happened. The story was postponed indefinitely due to changed news priorities. The article was never republished. Mercier died in 2003 in what was officially described as a robbery gone wrong. He was attacked in Paris, returning from the archives at 22:30 hours. The police investigation concluded it was homicide during robbery. His wallet, keys, and mobile phone were taken, but significantly, a briefcase containing copies of documents related to the Buchner case also disappeared. No suspects were ever arrested. What comes next connects all these scattered events into a pattern that can't be ignored and reveals why the files remain sealed even more than a century later.
The official records remain mostly sealed. The original reports filed by Jostet 18 are archived at the Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv in Freiburg under reference number RH16/2418, classification Geheim, secret, sealed until the year 2044. Attempts to obtain release under Freedom of Information laws have been consistently denied. In 2017, a British military historian, Dr. Michael Thornton, requested partial declassification. The request was reviewed by the Bundesamt für Verfassungsschutz, Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution. The response, after 16 months, stated release of the requested material would be contrary to the public interest and could compromise national security. No further explanation was provided. The public interest argument wasn't elaborated. How documents about events from over 100 years ago could still threaten national security remains unanswered. Files that have been released are heavily redacted. A 2009 FOIA release of Jostet 18 intelligence summaries from the March through June 1918 period included 47 pages. Of these, 32 were so heavily redacted they contained fewer than 20 legible words per page. Sections corresponding to dates around March 15th were removed completely, with notation exempt under Section 11, National Security. The March 15th sighting wasn't an isolated incident. Between 1914 and 1918, military records contain references to at least 73 similar incidents across multiple fronts. Italian Front, August 1917.
Corpo Aeronautico Militare pilots reported luminous objects at extreme altitudes during the 10th Battle of the Isonzo. 9 witnesses, all reports classified. Eastern Front, December 1916. German officers from the 8th Army observed light formations over the Prussian forests during the Russian retreat. 12 officers documented the phenomenon. The Oberkommando confiscated all reports. Officers were transferred to different units immediately afterward. Champagne Sector, France, April 1917. French and British troops reported cylindrical object over the battlefield during the Nivelle offensive, observed by both French and German forces. Captured German records from 1918 describe the same object using nearly identical language.
The geographic spread was enormous. The timeline spanned the entire war. The descriptions, despite coming from witnesses who couldn't have communicated with each other, showed remarkable consistency. Cylindrical or spherical objects, metallic appearance, impossible altitudes, rotation or movements defying known aerodynamics, absence of sound, acceleration speeds no technology could achieve. Official explanations, when they existed, attributed sightings to artillery flares and signal rockets, despite witness testimony clearly distinguishing the objects from familiar pyrotechnics. Enemy aircraft, despite the object's capabilities exceeding any technology of the era. Mass hallucination and war neurosis, despite witnesses including experienced officers and technical personnel. Atmospheric phenomena, despite weather records ruling out such explanations. These explanations appear in the few documents that reference the incidents at all. They're presented without supporting evidence. They ignore credible witness testimony. They fail to address technical impossibilities. They are, quite simply, dismissals rather than explanations. What they never attempted to explain was why, if these were misidentifications of conventional phenomena, such extreme measures were taken to suppress the reports. Why classify routine observation errors? Why scatter witnesses? Why eliminate testimony? March 15, 2028 marks the 110th anniversary of the sighting and Buchner's death. The date has significance in certain research communities. Documents related to World War I continue to be declassified on centennial and anniversary dates. March 15, 2028 falls under the 110-year rule some archives follow for sensitive military intelligence materials. There are indications that files related to early 1918 Luftstreitkräfte intelligence operations may be scheduled for review. Bundesarchiv documents show certain Abteilung 3B materials have been transferred from permanent classification to timed classification expiring on specific anniversaries. Whether March 15, 2028 will bring declassification, revelation, or continued suppression remains to be determined. You're watching this because you sensed something was missing from the standard World War I histories. The air war, the aces, the technological race between Allied and German aircraft, all of this is well documented. But there was another layer to that war in the skies, something pilots on both sides were witnessing, something that defied every principle of flight, altitude, and propulsion known in 1918. Franz Buchner saw it. He documented it with the precision of a trained military observer. He attempted to share his observations through official channels. He was interrogated, silenced, and dead within 16 hours. His combat log disappeared. His letter was intercepted. Every witness who corroborated his report died within 3 months. 7 men who saw the same object or who possessed documentation of the sighting were eliminated through combat deaths that don't match battle records, accidents defying probability, and medical emergencies later forensic examination contradicted. The pattern is undeniable. The suppression was systematic, witness elimination was thorough, and it occurred in the weeks immediately before and during Germany's final offensive.
Why was this particular sighting so threatening it required immediate classification and witness elimination? What was observed at 25,000 feet that March morning? Why does the suppression machinery established during the war remain operational more than 100 years later? Why do the files remain sealed under national security appeals that make no logical sense for century-old events? Leave a comment with these exact words: "The logbook disappeared." Nothing more, just that phrase. It's a signal, to me, to others watching, to the algorithm itself, that you understand what was taken from history. Don't elaborate, don't add context, just the phrase. Those who know will recognize it. March 15, 1918, at an airfield northeast of St. a German ace with 14 victories looked up and saw something at an altitude no aircraft could reach. Something metallic, rotating, silent, something that moved in ways violating all laws of aerodynamics. He documented it with military precision. He attempted to report it through appropriate channels. He told his brother, "I saw something that shouldn't exist." 16 hours later, he was dead. His combat log was confiscated. His letter was intercepted. Every witness was eliminated. Every document was classified or destroyed. But they couldn't eliminate the truth. Franz Buchner saw something in the skies over the Western Front, something German military intelligence determined must never become public knowledge. Something that required the death of an experienced combat pilot and the systematic elimination of all who could corroborate his testimony. They classified it, they suppressed it, they eliminated the witnesses, but the pattern remains visible to those who know where to look. Remember March 15th, 2028. Watch the skies. The logbook disappeared, but the truth it contained endures.
Drop a subscribe if this story changed your understanding of what really happened in the skies of World War I, because every week I document the testimonies military authorities tried to erase from history, the truth that required systematic witness elimination to keep hidden.